All right, so there are equally dramatic changes that are occurring during adolescence in the cognitive area as well. And one particular cognitive development, one particular theorist by the name of David Elkind, and he wrote a book called All Grown Up and No Place to Go. David, if you're interested, you can look it up. He basically talks about thinking in a new key is referring to this cognitive development that occurs, thinking in a new key. And the idea here is that if you're playing a piano in the key of C, let's say, and I may display my glittering ignorance of playing a piano, so those of you who do, just bear with me. But essentially, if you're playing a musical piece in the C of key and you jump to the key of G, that's a new key. Everything changes thereafter. It's not even the same. You're working in a different key. That same thing is what happens during adolescence in the cognitive development in the cerebral cortex and how it develops. That's why this particular little cartoon is cute, because it captures the idea of the new key and the development of the cerebral cortex, etc. The other thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes the hallmark of adolescence looks a little bit like a return to childhood, because there is such a intense self-focus, self-consciousness, if you will, which sometimes it leads to a lot of shyness and other things. But it seems to be a return to a extreme, if you will, self-centeredness. Adolescents oftentimes think that their private experiences are unique to them. That's sometimes why being in a group sometimes is very helpful in working with kids, adolescents in particular, because they really believe that what they're going through, no one else is going through. The other aspect of this self-consciousness you might refer to as what we refer to it as an internal audience or an internal critic, and it is part of adolescence. But they believe that most eyes are turned on them, for example, and we still have evidence of that even as adults. You're in a nice restaurant, let's say, with somebody family or somebody that you're having fun with, and by accident, and let's just also say that this restaurant has a wood floor on it, and you by accident knock your spoon off and it clanks to the floor and bounces and makes all sorts of noise, and you look around, assuming that everybody's looking at you. Well, that's still vestiges of this internal audience that is part of the adolescence. We carry various aspects of that still with us even into adulthood. The other thing to take note of, highlight for you, is somebody by the name of Lawrence Kohlberg, who developed a scale, if you will, at looking at moral thinking, and another example of a stage approach to looking at development and moral thinking. One of the things that he contended is that our moral thinking proceeds through a series of stages. Essentially, we start with the pre-conventional stage, and during this stage, self-interest drives it along. I do things because it benefits pre-conventional. I do things because it benefits me. And so I also resist doing things because of the consequences I will experience. So pre-conventional, is one example. A second example, or the next stage, if you will, is conventional. And conventional thinking, moral thinking, cares for others and is concerned, so others is a focus, and it cares about upholding laws. So there are a lot of people you meet today that never really get beyond the conventional stage. Law is really, in a sense, all that matters, and upholding that law is what's key. According to Kohlberg, there was also one last stage that he referred to as post-conventional. And post-conventional is agreed upon rights or ethical principles that guide my behavior. And interestingly enough, even when we think about our founding fathers, when they appealed to natural law, that's a good example. And of course, it precedes our awareness of it, but it precedes the idea of agreed upon rights that are naturally occurring in nature to man. So agreed upon rights and ethical principles. And essentially what you'll find if you continue to go farther into psychology, perhaps a lot of you are interested in going into counseling, many of the professional organizations have ethical principles. And ethical principles are what to guide, needless to say, ethical behavior. It provides kind of a guideline or a framework in which to understand how to behave, how to behave ethically. Now, in terms of Goldberg, most of his concepts here is what he referred to as culturally limited. So, in other words, these things vary from culture to culture, and the ethical principles themselves are unique to a specific culture. And the other key here to add in, and I'll just put it above here, is that these principles that he articulated are usually specific or unique to individualistic, I'll just put individualism, individualistic cultures in terms of our development and so forth. So Jonathan Haidt made mention of something he called moral intuitionist explanation, and that basically says that moral feelings precede moral reasoning, and so moral judgment involves what he refers to as quick gut feelings. Now, it depends on how you approach that or how you see that in terms of how rooted or anchored one's feelings are. I think most of us would probably agree that our feelings are not terribly well anchored in sometimes moral reasoning. A lot of the character education programs we see today teach kids to empathize with others and delay gratification. And so that's teaching it. Oftentimes some would contend that we're teaching it at a time that kids are not ready to hear it because their moral reasoning isn't to that stage yet. So as thinking matures, behavior also becomes less selfish, more caring, more other-oriented. But that's not a guarantee. Just because you age doesn't mean that you mature. And that's the same here with moral reasoning.